Today's guest is Cheyanne Headen. So I met Cheyanne at a place at the table, which is a pay what you can cafe in downtown Raleigh that allows people to volunteer for an hour in return for a meal. So we're going to talk more about that in the interview. Cheyanne is a community and de-escalation specialist, which in layman's terms means when things go south, she handles it. And boy, does she handle it. I have seen her handle it. When I first met her, I figured out two things very quickly. She's kind, she's strong, she's compassionate, but she does not take crap from people. I think that's accurate. She's that rare mix of a human being who can practice tough love and simultaneously make people feel good about it. So I am honored to have you on the show. Cheyanne, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that.
So let's start by talking a little bit about where you work and tell us what is a place at the table.
Okay, like you said, a place at the table is Raleigh's only pay what you can cafe. And what that looks like is that, excuse me, all of the prices on our menu are suggested prices. If people are able to pay that, awesome, pay that. If they're unable to pay that, they can pay less. And if they can't pay less, they can use volunteering as their form of payment. And we ask that they volunteer an hour of their time. And that way everyone can eat regardless of means.
And you have a very unique role in a place at the table. Talk about what your job is specifically.
Well, as the Community and De-escalation specialist, I think you kind of hit it on the head. But the other part of that is that I also have the best job because I'm the person that really gets to build relationships with our community.
And we're talking generally, not everyone, but a lot of these people are unhoused, correct?
Some of them.
Some of them are dealing with mental health issues, with addiction issues, many, many, many different issues. That's a lot. What is your background? How did you get into a role like this?
Well, literally for the last 20 years, I've been providing services in every area, like foster care, for example. I used to supervise foster homes, but therapeutic foster homes. So all of my kids had a mental health diagnosis. And in that same area, I also ran a rapid response program. And so so I guess what I'm trying to say is
You've
children,
always been in that space.
Correct. Well, not always. For the last 20 years.
Right. For 2 decades, you've been in this space.
Correct. Absolutely in this space. But it prepared me for this role. I'm very clear that all of my experience working with children and families, the last position that I had before I left home, which is New York, was actually working with DV. I had never worked with that population.
With domestic violence.
Correct.
Victims.
Correct. But I wasn't working with the victims. I was working with the persons that cause harm.
So you were working with the offenders.
Correct. So that enabled me, it gave me a different perspective. Because
Absolutely.
it enabled me to see the humanity in everyone.
That's a great way of putting it, because I have been volunteering now for almost 3 years at a place at the table. And I would say that I've been challenged in ways that I didn't expect to be challenged. I walked in there thinking, oh, I'm so open-minded. I've seen it all. I've been a crime reporter. But you haven't seen it all until you volunteered in this community. And then you realize, wow, maybe I have to step back and rethink some of the stereotypes that I already had in my head that maybe I didn't even realize I had. So let's back way, way, way up.
Right.
So Cheyanne, tell me where you're from and what your life was like growing up. And obviously this is not your first career. So let's back up and do your origin story, if you will.
Of course, of course. Like I said, I'm from New York. I grew up in Manhattan, in Harlem. I hail that like hard.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm definitely a Harlem black girl. That's me.
As you should be.
And I was raised, like I said, in the city. I went to a very small private school for kids who worked called PCS. And so most of us worked in some capacity.
So you had after school jobs, evening jobs, and that made it harder for you to do your homework. Obviously you were tired, so they worked around that, I guess.
Or like, when I was there, it was primarily actors, ballet dancers, skaters.
Oh, okay. So people that were already starting on a professional
Correct.
path.
Correct. Like I had my first screen test when I was 6.
So you were already
I was an actor.
working in
Yes.
the acting space. Okay, great.
Correct. And yeah, so it was a very small private school in Manhattan. And there was that part of my life. When I was going to college, I decided that I didn't necessarily want to be in front of the camera. I wanted to be behind the camera
So you were interested more in the production
and the
aspect.
production side. And so initially I went to Ithaca College upstate, and it was freezing.
Yes, that would
And
be
I
very
was like,
cold.
what was I thinking?
Yeah.
Digging my car out. I'm not that girl. My dad
Yeah.
pays people to dig out my car. Like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? So, yeah, I transferred what I considered down south. And I also decided, because my school was a very small predominantly white school, and I wanted to go to an HBCU.
Sure.
So I transferred to Morgan State University, and it changed my life.
Tell me how.
This is going to sound really, I'm not proud of this, but it's my truth. I had never really known of kids who worked in like real jobs and went to school at the same time.
So jobs like working at a restaurant, working in an office.
Or like if I knew people who waited tables, it was a survival gig, or an up like charivari, like upper end stores, so that they could get a discount kind of thing. But not kids who like
Were working
went
for
to
their
class in the
education.
morning. Correct. Went to class in the morning and went to school, and that was fascinating. I was like
Eye-opening.
eye-opening, because to me, you worked in the summer.
Right.
My dad worked at General Motors. And so they had a college internship program. So I did it for 2 summers and my sister did it for 2 summers. And so to me, that's like what you do. But you go to work to really make money to pay for your education. That was different for me. And it was very eye-opening, like you said. It introduced me to a whole different way of living and thinking that I had not been privy to, per se.
So in a way, maybe that was kind of the beginning of you being interested in social work, because you were starting to see that everybody didn't live the same way you did.
And so now here's the other thing. Growing up in the city in the 80s, you know that people are completely different. And I was different because I lived in Harlem, but all of my friends were just like me. We were all little black girls who went to white private schools. So we just kind of rolled like New York City kids in the 80s.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. You were privileged.
Yeah. Well, not as some of my friends were
Not
a
as-
lot more privileged.
Right, but you were in a space with other privileged kids. You weren't seeing, like you saw in college. You weren't seeing necessarily the people who were working class. You weren't seeing that in your space, in your immediate world.
Well, here's the thing. My dad was working class, right? So I got it, but I got it in a sense. I don't know really how to.
But you were being raised middle class.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, we were lower middle class, or middle class. Like my education cost a lot of money, and my parents made that happen. So
They worked hard for it.
they did. But see, that's the thing. That's nothing I never took that for granted.
Well, that's
I was very clear that they worked very hard in order for me to have.
to be where you were.
Correct.
So you get out of college, and what did you get into in terms of the entertainment industry?
My first, this is kind of, my first job out of college was working at the Cosby Show. And I had taken a media buying gig when I first graduated on Avenue of the Americas. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be a little exec. And I had, of course, flooded the industry with resumes. And 2 weeks in, I got a call from the Cosby Show to be a wardrobe intern. So I left a paying gig to go be an intern
Well,
because
that was a big show at the time.
it was a huge show.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun.
I'm sure. I'm sure you met a lot of interesting people.
A lot of interesting people, lots. And then from there, like I got a chance. I worked on a lot of music videos. You know, I was PAs. I did, you know, everything on the production side. And then at the same time, still some stuff in front of the camera or on stage, you know, anything like that, because that's kind of a part of who you are.
Right.
You don't really know how to let that go.
Right.
You know, so I did that until, and I moved back and forth between New York and Maryland for a while. But when I decided, like, okay, I'm coming home to save money, to move to Los Angeles.
Because this is it. Your star is rising, right?
Well, and my best friends had already moved.
So you thought this is probably a good move.
And, you know, I'm blessed. I'm extremely blessed because a large majority of my friends have been in my life forever. Like my very best friend has, since the first day of first grade, on the way to school, she became my best friend.
Yeah, that makes a big difference to have that kind of support. So did you go to Los Angeles?
Yeah, I did, and I lived there for 7 years. At first I was doing publicity for what children's publicity, or youthful, like Jennifer Love Hewitt. They were all the kids that
The
were
up
the
and
rage
coming, sure.
at that time, and I did that for a while. That was actually in Vegas. I moved to Vegas first, and then I was like, yeah, I don't like Vegas. Not for me. Not as a single person.
Sure.
It's truly crazy.
Yeah,
for me at that time. So let me move to LA where my friends are. So I moved to LA, and I was working at Warner Brothers, and I was doing product placement and stuff like that. And then my aunt, she had gotten a series, and she asked me to come be her stand-in. And she was like, so we can get you back in the front of the camera where you belong. Okay. And so I did that for a while for Becker. It was great.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I worked. That was great because that also, I was able to see, like, Ted Danson is so humble for him to be as
Big of a star.
as he is.
Yeah.
Like, he was one of the few people, celebrities of his stature that I saw come greet all the extras.
To be kind, right.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Ted. What do you do? Like, it was amazing.
So to have that was a great experience for you in a world that doesn't always happen.
It does not happen. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
Right.
used to being on sets where you're like, don't talk to the stars.
Yeah.
You can't look at them, you know, crazy
Right,
things like that.
right.
And for him, I was like, wow, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I did that. And then for like 7 years total, I stayed in Los Angeles. And then I had come home and I saw for the first time, my dad had gray hair on his goatee. And I was like, you need to be closer.
Yeah. It's a long way, California to New York.
So, but at the time I did not want to move back to New York because it was still so expensive. I was like, even though LA is expensive, but one of my cousins had just moved down here. So I moved to North Carolina. And I stayed here I moved here in 2003 initially. And I stayed till 2008 because my mother was diagnosed. My dad died 6 months after my son was born, which was 2006. And then 2 years later, my mother was diagnosed with cancer for the second time. So I was like, gotta go home. So I went home for a while and worked at a lot of different nonprofits. I've always worked in the nonprofit sector. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you how I transitioned.
Yeah, that's
That's a
one of
huge
the
part of the
questions,
story.
right? How do you go from being in the entertainment industry to the nonprofit world?
So it's twofold. A part of my personality is that I enjoy people, getting to know people. So I'm a good listener. So I listen to what people say, but I also listen to what they don't say.
Sure.
And I had a lot of people come to me and like just pour their hearts out. And then the other part of that is I was working in the industry and I was like, everyone's crazy and I need to become a therapist and make money. So I moved to North Carolina. That was my intent, was to come back and go to grad school and become a therapist. And then I started working, doing case management, had my son, blah, blah, blah. So the role moved back
Right.
home. So it just kept,
So
it
that
kept going.
graduate degree kept kind of slipping into the background.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because I was, a caretaker. I was a single mom. It was all of the things. And so, yeah, that just kind of slipped away. And then after my mother transitioned, she transitioned in 2013, I was like, okay. Because also the other part of that is when I initially went home, it was to move her back down here.
And then you weren't
And I,
able to do that.
well,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel right about that because she didn't drive.
Yeah.
And so I was like, so you're going to uproot her independence,
Sure.
her home,
And she was in an area that she could walk.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Or take the bus, or, you know what I mean? So
She had freedom.
she had freedom. And it was important to me for the last years of her life for her to be comfortable,
Yeah.
So with that said, yeah, after she transitioned, I decided to come back down here.
And by transition, you mean she passed away.
Correct, correct. And so I did that for a year. For that was in 2014. And the other part of that, I was bringing my son down so that he could live with his dad because his dad lived in
Dad's
North
here.
Carolina.
Okay.
And so after he got settled there, I decided that I wasn't really ready to leave New York. So I was back and forth
So you were ping-ponging because you were coming here.
to all the time because actually I had moved to Charlotte and I had an apartment in Charlotte that they would not let me out of my lease. So I would have to come down. I was
Yeah.
like doing the whole dance for a few years. And then when my son was a little bit older, like middle school, which is tricky, I was
Yeah.
like, I need to have eyes on him.
Right.
So I moved back down here permanently in 2019. And I've been here ever since.
So you've done many different things
Mm-hmm.
in this world of nonprofits
Mm-hmm.
and social service. How does the job that you have now, how did that come about, and how does that fit in to what you've done in the past?
Well, it's funny how it came about. I do have the mentality of an actor. So I always believe in having a survival gig.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so in between gigs, I was working with one of my best friends, my sister of the heart, and she's a community organizer for voter engagement. And so she was like, well, you're looking for something, come work with us. So I did. And we tabled at a place at the table
Oh, so you went and handed out information, talked to people.
about voter engagement. And one of the managers, Emily, and I just kind of formed a bond very quickly. She reminded me of my friends from home a lot. Like we laughed and, all the things. And so one day we were tabling there and she said, we have a new position. And I was like, oh, cool. And she said, the person has to have a background in social work. Because she has been a social worker and she was about to go to grad school.
Right.
For her MSW. And so we had talked about that. And so she kind of looked at me like, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And she said, would you please read the job description? And I was like, sure. Went in one ear and out the other. And like when I came back a few weeks later, she was like,
Have you read it?
were your ears burning? Because we've been trying to find you.
Yeah.
And so someone that I worked with knew Terrence, who was on our board, and he was reaching out to him. And it was just like all of these things. And I was like, oh God, this is a little more intense.
These are kind of threads, though, or signs.
Yep.
Right.
And I read it and lost it. This position was tailor made for me.
Absolutely. And you were recently just named one of the top 50 people who are over 50 making an impact in Raleigh by Raleigh Magazine. So congratulations for that.
Well, thank you and congratulations to you too, because
thank
you also received that honor.
I think one of the things that struck me that day or night was that you had a big group with you, and you mentioned your friendships that you've had. Who was there? I mean, you had family, you had friends, right?
Yes. My cousin, who is one of my best friends, since we were little, like she's been my rock. I call her the mayor of Durham. She's the mayor of Durham. Everyone knows her.
Everybody.
Well, and also she's very noticeable because she's got this big shock of white hair.
Okay.
And
I do remember her from the event.
she's very noteworthy. You cannot go anywhere in Durham without people like, Omi Sade.
Everybody knows her.
Everyone knows her because she's been working in reproductive justice. Like she's been doing it forever, but she now has a podcast.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, she has for us, it's called The Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That sounds very cool.
it is very cool, but it's a platform. It's major. Like
That sounds great.
yeah, she's done a really great job. So she was with me. My sister of the heart, who I mentioned, Erica, was with me, and one of my one of my besties came from New York,
That's fantastic.
and that's who was with me.
That's
But we're
great.
just kind of noticeable when we enter a place. That's just kind of what we do.
Well, you guys had a lot of good positive energy, a lot of smiles. So, you're a mom. How old's your son now?
17.
You have balanced a lot in your life. You talked about your mother being sick and, trying to balance career, caregiving, raising a child. That's a lot at one time. And it's something that so many women are going through, right? They're
Absolutely.
dealing with a lot of these things at one time. At the same time, a lot of women over 50 don't feel seen. They don't feel relevant. They don't feel like their ideas are important to anyone.
Right.
And they don't know what's next around the corner, what the next chapter is. So what advice would you give to women who are feeling that way, who are like, I'm overwhelmed, I've got all this stuff on my plate, got to pay the bills, but I also want to figure out what's for me, what makes me, smile, what makes me, what fuels my fire?
Well, I think it's always important, right? It's important to prioritize your dreams. And I was blessed enough to have parents that really did instill, like, if you can dream it, you can achieve it. Not everyone has that, so I think it's important. I've always had that luxury of, I'm going to try that. This isn't because I didn't have any kids, right? Oh, yeah, I think I want to move to Vegas. Will you guys create a position for me, like at my job? And they'd be like, sure. And then I'd move to Vegas.
Manifesting it,
right. So that's kind of, that's been my mindset because I didn't know anything different. So I do believe it's really important to follow your heart and to follow your dreams. That's just kind of, life is too short. At this juncture, if we didn't know it before, we know now.
Right. The pandemic taught us a lot of things.
Taught us a lot. And, just our peers, it's just so much. And or parents. Like we're at the stage where people's parents are transitioning. You know what I mean? It's a lot. And so I think that it's super important to follow your heart, follow your dreams. Life is way too short not to just like enjoy it. Life is meant to be lived.
And I have been around your son quite a bit. I've volunteered with him. And gosh, you and his father have done such a good job.
Thank you.
I mean, he's kind, he's funny, he's smart. And so I feel like you've passed along all of the things we've been talking about to him because I see that in him. He seems like a kid that thinks anything is possible. I mean, was that intentional?
Yeah, for me. Since he was in utero, I had goals for him that I would say to him. And they grew over the years. But like, be happy, be grateful, be respectful, be responsible, learn something, teach something, take a risk, never give up. God, we got up to 13. And like when we would walk to school, like we would add another one, move with integrity. Like these are things that he was raised on. Like I was very serious about that. And I would say every day. So on the way to school, I'd ask him, which of your goals are you going to try to achieve today? And he would say, be honest. And I'm like, okay. So then after school, at home, I'd be like, so.
How'd it go?
And then I'm like, okay, if you fell a little short, okay, that happens. We're going to try again tomorrow. So that was very intentional. I believe that you have to be intentional as a parent.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because kids, their frontal lobe isn't even closed. They don't know.
Well, I will say the other thing that I was very impressed about was his sarcasm. Yes. So he really got that. He really got that. One day we were switching jobs. I can't remember what it was, and he said, "I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'm going to get that. I'm going to get that volunteer
remember that.
job." Yeah. And I'm going to move into, what you're looking at in the future. But I think before we wrap up, what are some of the really important things that being at Place at the Table has taught you? Because I know it's taught me so much, and you're obviously there all the time. I'm there one day a week. So what have you taken away from this experience?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. It made me aware of some of my biases, right? It made me have to really apply seeing the humanity in everybody. It's like I learned that in theory in past roles.
Intellectually,
Intellectually.
but to put it into practice.
I learned to put it into practice every single day, even when I don't feel like it.
I see you in your head doing the 1, 2, 3 sometimes, which is what I taught my kids,
Yes.
and I taught myself.
Yeah.
Because I know these situations sometimes are so complex. There's so many layers to poverty, to homelessness, to addiction, to mental illness, and
And you know what? And just underserved.
Yeah,
Just underserved communities. We have people who are housed, but they can't afford to really feed their families and pay the rent.
right. So there's so many different obstacles that they're trying to deal with every single day.
Correct.
And you can't solve them.
No.
I mean, you can give them a meal,
And that's what
and that's what we do.
every single day, that's what we tell ourselves. We're just trying to do our little part,
Little piece.
little piece of the world.
Yeah.
And make a difference. And if I'm able to do that, then I've done like my job at a place at the table, but certainly my job and for my personhood.
As a human being.
For my humanity.
As a human being.
It's super important.
Okay, so I always ask this question: what's on your bucket list?
Oh my God, so many things. Because I do kind of feel like I've been on hold for a minute, in a holding pattern. Maybe that's a better way to word it. To travel a lot more. That's a big one because I really have put that on hold. I realized at a certain point that very rarely do I travel for vacations. I travel to see people for a destination. I'm going to go see family. I haven't seen my aunt. That's a wonderful time and I'm blessed, but that's
You're
not
not
necessarily
learning something new or seeing something new,
right. Or sitting on a beach and having cocktails and reading a book. I do that not often enough.
Sure, just something for yourself.
Something for myself.
But you're going to see the light. Your son's growing
Yes.
up. He's going to
Yes.
go off and do his own thing.
Yeah, for sure. But certainly a lot more travel. Prioritizing myself.
Making space for yourself.
Correct. Because my self-care has gone out the window. I used to always say, when I was younger, before I was a mom, obviously, that what did I say? Pampering myself was just part of the art of being Cheyanne. And then you have a child, and
That changes it.
it changes your perspective. So definitely, incorporating all aspects of my being back into myself, and that looks like living. You see this. I love to laugh. I find the joke in everything, even when it's inappropriate. I've always been that way.
And sometimes if you didn't laugh, you'd cry, right?
Yep.
So we do have some good laughs at Place at the Table.
We do.
At our own expense, often. Sometimes at other people's expense, but usually all in good humor because you're just trying to kind of blow off steam, right? And and if you didn't laugh,
Yep.
what would life be?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I couldn't
don't either.
exist.
I don't either.
I couldn't exist. Yeah.
So one of the things, Cheyanne, I'm doing is I'm featuring some art in all of the shows. So this 16 by 20 is called Flash in Life. It's by my friend Mary Alice. You can find her on Instagram at the Dizzy Hue, DIZZYHUE, and I will put that in the show notes. Cheyanne, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. I can't believe it took me so long to have you on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
But you have touched me in so many ways every time I've been around you, and It's just, I'm humbled that you would sit down and do this with me. So thank you.
Well, I'm humbled that you asked me, so thank you.